I'm Laurel, and I made this. I don't know if you've seen these before, but these paper theaters were craft kits, and I picked up some when we were in Japan. They're really cool, and they're laser cut out of paper, and you can just put them together, and they're super fun. Anyway, I had such a good time putting these together, I wanted to do more, but couldn't really find any kits like this. What I did find was this paper cut template on Etsy. The link's down below. There's not a whole lot you need for a project like this. Double stick foam squares, an X-Acto knife and blades, a container to put used blades in, some tweezers, glue, something to put the glue in, and toothpicks to spread said glue. The instructions say to grab papers in 160 GSM weight paper, but I had no clue what weight that was, so I just grabbed papers based on the colors that matched the example. The instructions also said, and other colored papers, which wasn't very helpful. All the pages were made for an A4 sized paper, and the paper sheets that were the closest were a 12 by 12 inch paper. So I had to cut them down so they'd fit in my printer. Now I lightened this template a bit because ink is expensive. Well, this brown paper right here was too thick to run through my printer, so I printed out the template on normal paper and glued it to the back. Now hopefully I can pull it off when finished at the end. Oh, and here's my little craft helper. Just starting with this page, I quickly learned that this was going to be much harder than I anticipated. Curves are hard with an X-Acto knife, especially when you have a helper on your paper. Next I did what appeared to be the most complicated page. It was also the level I was supposed to cut next. The instructions said to start with the smallest pieces first, so that's what I did, and the smallest ones were definitely small. Now, I'm no stranger to an X-Acto knife. It's pretty much been a constant since my college days. Sometimes it was hard to cut the piece all the way through, so I'd flip it over and check and fix some of the smaller cuts. Now let me tell you, this was slow going. But on the upside, all the small cuts sure upped my confidence because it seemed to be going quite well. Probably because they were all small straight cuts with only a few little curves. Well, until I got to this candelabra. These cuts were super small, and also the candlesticks were so narrow it was tough to cut, and I was so scared I was going to rip it. I mean, look at the small little areas that I had to cut. Whew, made it. Good thing it was just one. The blade already started to rip the paper, so on to blade 2. Remember to always put used blades in a container. You don't want to stab the garbage collectors. Well, back to it. You know what else stinks to cut? These little bows. Oh no! Do you see what I see? A second candelabra. Well, let's hope I learned a little something cutting that other one. I could also tell at this point that this paper was definitely thicker than intended, but I was grateful there wasn't a lot of difficult cuts. I think even though there were a lot of cuts, even the curves weren't too bad, again because of how short each of these cuts were. Well, here comes my little helper again, here to headbutt the camera. Such a helpful little guy. Yay, all done! Now time to hold my breath while taking this paper off. So far so good. Careful of that candelabra, Laurel. Well, looks like this glue stick worked a little too well. Why does glue always seem to stick well when you don't want it to? You might be curious why I'm taking so much time removing the paper. Well, you can see the white paper at the edge of these cuts when you get close, which wouldn't be a big deal if this paper was white, but it was getting placed on a dark background, so it'd definitely be noticeable. My big concern was getting it away from the edges. Not an edge around it, not something to be concerned about. Luckily, this paper layer was pretty sturdy, so I could do some intense scraping and you couldn't see it from the other side. There we go, all done. Time for the next layer. I was so thankful there were less micro cuts on this layer. Well, except for the bows. But other than the bows, pretty smooth sailing. Oh, looks like I have another cat visitor.
Hey, Lilith.
But she doesn't want to help. She just wants scritches. Right now I'm cutting out these vine pieces, which weren't exactly a piece of cake with all of these thorns and leaves in condensed places. Another thing I learned is greasy fingerprints show up on paper. So it's important to take breaks to wash your hands. At least it's on the back so it wouldn't be seen. I don't know if it's my age, but I was starting to get some hand pain at this point, which wasn't too surprising considering all the cutting that was going on. And I'd been cutting for 2.5 hours straight at this point. What I didn't expect was getting blisters on my knuckles. What the heck? I suppose I should take a break. Or keep going because I'm almost finished with this page. Kinda. But I was also having a really good time. There's something incredibly satisfying seeing the paper being carved away, revealing all your hard work. Hopefully, you're finding this as satisfying to watch as I was cutting it. You know the funny thing? This layer took way longer than the last one. Longer cuts maybe? I don't know how this stuff goes. Maybe I was going slower because my hand was aching. I'm really too stubborn for my own good sometimes. Layer 3, done and done. You can kind of see how these layers are starting to look together, and that kind of makes the hand ache worth it. Okay, so I took a break, day 2, and page number 4. And I'd amp myself up a little bit for this one. I mean, there's a lot of big curves, but not so much to cut. The little dude is back to help me out. He's so considerate. And even more bows. At least this is the last page with bows? Or not. No, it's not. I loved cutting this brick chimney. It was so satisfying. Just a bunch of straight cuts, so I could do it pretty quickly since I didn't have to turn the paper for every cut. Also, I got to do a lot of my favorite part, flinging these paper pieces out with my knife. It's no wonder I kept breaking the knife tip. The thing that kinda sucks with this project is all the repetitive cuts because of the way the layers are made. I'm sure it's to keep the layer stable when it's done. Each mushroom and vine and those darn little bows had to be cut the same on every level. And I was so paranoid because I just knew they'd all be slightly different so they wouldn't exactly line up and they'd probably look sloppy, ruining the space layer effect. I thought these bows weren't fun. Well, neither were these small circles. Finally, with the frame cut out on this layer, we can really get an idea of what it'll look like when it's done. I think it's looking pretty neat. Let's go ahead and tackle the second to last layer. Starting with the small bits, just like all the other layers, I got to cutting. Having a hard time seeing that template? Yeah, me too. I definitely should have printed this layer darker. I had to keep cupping the light out just so I could see what I was trying to cut. And of course, this layer looks like the simplest to cut out, but was by far the most difficult. And this didn't help. Cutting out these clocks was definitely the most stressful part of this project. And I'm just going to jump to the end here. And why is that? Oh, well, I'll show you right here. These clocks look way chunkier than I wanted, and the rest of the cuts were all over the place. So I went to the store and bought another sheet of paper and decided to do it all over again. This time, hopefully, I learned from my mistakes. And you can tell this time around, I printed out my template much darker. And here's the real shocker. Seeing what I was cutting actually made cutting things out easier. Okay, good. All these tiny parts are done, and wouldn't you know it, the air conditioner dropped water on here. I mopped it up with my shirt and kept going, but I had a mild heart attack it would warp the paper, because I did not want to cut it again. One thing I learned from my first go at this was the cutting order, especially when it came to these clocks, keys, and ribbons. For the clocks, I carefully cut the centers out, keeping a close eye on maintaining the curves. Then I cut out the outside curve of the top before attempting to cut the rest of the inside. I left lots of small parts intact, like the ends of the bows or some of the corner junctions, to help make sure that these larger cuts were more stable. I now systematically cut out everything from left to right, doing it in controlled segments like this, leaving the large pieces of paper in there versus clearing them out to keep me from having loose, delicate pieces flopping all over the place just asking to get bent or ripped off. I was also super careful around the outside of these clocks, trying to keep them as round and even as possible. Now that all the complicated parts were cut, I cut out the simpler shapes at the bottom. The hard part is almost over. Weeding out the paper scraps was a very deliberate process. I did it in sections because there's still lots of tiny parts that needed to be severed, and this gave me the most control over their removal. There! That looks so much better to me. Oh boy, I forgot I printed this one light too. At least there's not much to it. And now the main pieces are all cut. Now it's time to cut out all the pretty paper bits. Even though I started the big cuts from the back layer to the front, I cut out all these decorative pieces starting at the top layer and moving backwards. To cut these out, I used that glue stick method again since it worked pretty well before. I cut the pieces from the template, glued them to the back, then started cutting, and then I had to pull paper off of all the pieces. First layer pieces cut, and time to glue them on. I was a little upset with how much the underlayer was showing, so I went back in and I started trimming. Looking pretty good. You know, that layer with all the clock faces? This one had pieces for the mushrooms inside the keys and the clock faces. I kept my phone nearby with the finished piece on it to make sure that I cut the right pieces out of the right color of paper. Something to keep in mind when gluing pieces together, you want to put glue on the back of the piece with the most cuts on it, and this helps reduce the amount of glue that you see at the end. Trying to keep my gross cutting mat clean, I put these clocks on a piece of paper while I glued the backs onto them, and this was a mistake, because when I went to turn the pieces back over, I was pretty sure I would have to recut that layer again. But after some smooshing and scraping, it looked okay. I really didn't want to cut it again. Layer 3 is really the layer that does all the decorative heavy lifting. There's a lot that lives on it, starting with the vines, which of course are super intricate and delicate to cut. They really add a nice pop though. There was this little note next to these on the template sheet that said, "You may need to cut away vines to put these on." Great. I spent all that time cutting these for no reason. So I cut away the brown vines and replaced them with the pretty green ones. They wrap around so some of the vines glue to the front and the other parts get glued to the back, and it actually makes it look pretty cool. Just pop the brown to the back of the chimney. Gotta admit, trying to be careful spreading the large amount of glue was a little tough. It gets a little gloopy. Then came the fireplace logs, and I am pretty proud of myself for realizing that the log interior is the exact same size as a standard hole punch. Score! Now making this cute framed rabbit silhouette. It's comprised of 5 different pieces, a black piece with the rabbit and a white backing. Then the frame goes on this awesome gold paper. Shiny. I'm pretty sure I cut this in the wrong order, and I should have probably cut the outside then the inside, because cutting this oval, well, it was rough. The scalloped oval I thought would be super hard to cut. Ended up, it was the easiest. Small cuts are just easier to cut than large ones. Then the 2 oval rings go on the top, and the scalloped oval on the bottom. I'm not gonna lie, up close this looks pretty rough. Well, let's put it on anyway. I mean, it's hand cut, right? That's just part of it. I needed to cut out these playing cards, which, how am I supposed to cut these card suits? They are tiny. The answer is just do it and accept that they'll look how they're gonna look, because I am just a human with a blade and it'll be what it'll be. I couldn't really tell what suit was each after I cut it, so I made sure and kept the cards that would have the red back separate from the ones that had the black until I got them glued together. The white paper I bought for this was probably way too thick, which probably didn't help when I tried doing small cuts, but it sure added some great depth when glued onto the card explosion pieces. Once I glued the cards on, I trimmed the brown layer a little so it'd match up, and we can call this layer done. These last 2 just have some fire pieces, and now we can assemble it. To assemble these layers, we just need some double stick foam squares, the knife, and some patience. The instructions say start from the front and work your way to the back layer, and use a whole bunch of foam pieces. The more the better, apparently. For our little Alice, I applied her first, and I managed to get fingerprints on her dress. Womp womp. Then all over the back of the frame. These squares weren't small enough for the frame on this, and let me tell you, cutting small double stick foam pieces in half is not fun. Well, then you put the back layer on the front layer. Apparently, you can line things up better when you apply them in reverse order like this. And then it's just rinse and repeat, adding more and more foam pieces with each layer. I tried to make sure and put the foam pieces in the same location on each layer to keep the pieces stable. When it came to the clocks, I kept the backing on them while sticking everything else together so I could line up their placement more precisely, since they had a tendency to kind of fly wherever they wanted. Oof, I forgot how gross the back of this layer looked. Good thing it's about to get covered up. And with that, all that's left is to frame it. I bought an 11 by 14 shadow box frame, but it had this fabric backing which wasn't going to work. So I cut down a piece of artboard to fit, then centered the piece so I knew where to apply it. I didn't know the best way to attach it, so I just used some more of the foam pieces. I mean, if it's good enough for the rest of the piece, why not this part too? Between all the different types of cuts, various paperweights, my hand getting sore, and redoing parts, this was not a simple piece to put together. Not to mention the 8 X-Acto blades and 10 cat visits. I was a little bummed about how rough these cuts look, but from a distance, they actually look pretty good. This definitely won't be my last paper cut piece. I really enjoyed doing it, and I really want to try and design my own next time. I could have used my Cricut machine to cut it out for me, and then I would have just assembled it, and it probably would have looked a lot cleaner. But you know, if I'd done that, I don't think I'd be nearly as proud of it. And you know what? I'm pretty dang proud of it. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. If you'd like to subscribe or share this video, that'd be pretty cool, and I will see you next time. Bye!